Good luck. I know. Yeah, we're straight into it, and you say good luck before we even start. Like that's a really good return to season two. Ben, great to kind of meet you. I've been looking forward to this one for the few weeks we've been talking about it. Um, as always, we just kick off with a little bit of an introduction into who you are, and then we'll see where the next 45 minutes of our lives take us. So, John, just let the listeners know who you are, who you're here representing, and why the hell you're on this podcast.
Yeah. So as to why the hell I'm on this podcast, I've no idea. Um, I think I must have been the only guest you had. No. Um, so in terms of who I am, I'm Ben. I'm the owner and director of Harmony Coffee. I think director being the more relevant of those two things. So I specialize in sourcing specialty coffees from all around the globe, developing partnerships with farms, with importers, tasting all of the best coffees that I can, bringing those to the UK or using an import facility to do that for me, taking them into the roastery, tasting them, roasting them, labeling them, distributing them. I do virtually everything. And then in terms of wholesale, I also work with coffee shops doing trainings, doing little bits of PR like public events, public tastings, like one of the ones we mentioned just a second ago, and all of that kind of stuff. So the most interesting part about what I have to do, I would say, is definitely the tasting part. It's a very small part of the job. I think there's this sort of romantic notion when you set up something that's revolved around a product that is, can be quite exciting, like coffee or wine or chocolate or something, that most of the job is going to be tasting. And actually it's more like 1% of the job. But it's the 1% that I look most forward to. So that's a small enough, but probably the most important part as well. So I don't spend very long doing it, but it's the most important part of the job, and just hilariously good fun. I'm very lucky now that I'm not doing it on my own, but I was doing it on my own. We set up in 2022, and for the first year and 2 years and a bit, I was doing it completely solo. But now we have a small team of people doing things. I started off by bringing someone on to help me with marketing, because that's the one thing that I am absolutely abysmal at. Then we started bringing someone on to help out with wholesale, because I just started getting way too busy. So yeah, it's just one of those things that's just great fun from start to finish. So that's pretty much a catalyst of what I am as a person now. I am the business, and I very much struggle to do anything else, because it just occupies all of my time, thoughts, space, etc. It's just obsession, really.
So what sparked the going it alone, I suppose, because you've worked with some great, but I mean, I can't be bothered doing the legacy thing. Go on the About Us on Harmony if you want to read all of Ben's accolade. We don't need to blow smoke up to how good Ben has been over the years. In certain, but you've worked with some great people. What sparked do you know what, I'm going to do this on my own, especially in a city that, in York we've got some good coffee shops, but it's not always had the best coffee history, and it's not really got that, I suppose, established presence like the Manchesters of the world or the Bristols. What made you do it?
So that's an excellent question. God, what a great question to start, actually.
Straight in.
What made me start? Well, it happened to be a stroke of sheer luck that I was moving to York. As much as my accent sort of doesn't give that away, I'm not from these parts originally. I used to live down in Winchester, which I think is the only place more posh than York. Maybe Chester is up there as well. So I was living down south, and I was working at a London roastery, and it happened to be that the London roastery that I was working at was relocating, and they were relocating from an area which originally took me 1 hour and 18 minutes to get to on a good day, via commuter trains, to 3 hours and 45 minutes each way. So nearly 8 hours of my day was going to be spent on a train before I'd even got to work. So I knew straight away that whatever situation arose, I wasn't going to keep doing that. And it happened to coincide with when my partner got a job at the same time. So she had been working 3 months or so on a sort of, what's the word for it? Like not a volunteer basis. It's the word's escaping me at the moment. Working internship. And so she'd completed her internship and was commuting a little bit to York here and there, spending a few days up here, then coming back down, doing some remote work. And then it basically transpired that she was being offered a full-time role to do what she was doing. And it was clear that I wasn't able to continue working at the place that I was working at. And so we had a choice collectively. Do we want to just move to York, where the work is, and then I find a job while I'm up here? Do we want to go halfway to like Peterborough, where she has a commute and I have a commute, but we both still keep our same jobs? Or do I want to just sort of take a leap and just set something up and have a go at it? And it transpired at the same time that her employer had a sort of commercial unit that he was using, but he was moving out of. And he said, well, if you want, we can sweeten the deal. As I recognize that you're going to take some degree of risk coming up here for yourself, so to help us out, why don't you take the unit and you can just try it? That's what I did. And for the first year and a bit, it was really, really slow. And then last year was just explosive growth. And now I'm no longer in that unit, and we're growing. So to the point where now I can no longer do it by myself. So yeah, it was one of those right place, right time things, and exactly at the right time happened. Yeah. So, and it also was one of those things that I was looking at York and I thought, well, what do I want to set up? Let's say I did come here. What would I set up if I was going to set up a business? And roasting is something I have an immense amount of, pedigree in. I'm not trying to be, too pretentious about myself here, but I've worked for a very, very strong, almost, well, if it was the chefing realm, it would be something along the Michelin lines, So I got a good pedigree of training from my last work, and it would be stupid not to set something up where either coffee roasting or high quality coffee was not involved. And I also have some good experience being a barista and working in that environment. And so I was either coffee shop or coffee roaster. And I looked around and there were some coffee roasters in the area, but none of them were doing what I thought would be popular. And York is a town that's got a good young population of people. It's quite affluent. These aren't necessarily things that automatically guarantee that specialty coffee is going to be a hit, because there are affluent places where it's not a thing at all. And there are places with less affluence where it's very, very popular indeed. And so it's always a risk. But I felt with the young demographic, quite a creative university, York St John and York Uni of, with lots of tourism trade and stuff like that. I was like, I think getting a roastery is probably the right move. And I think, a year and 2 or 3 years later, almost, it's worked. So thankfully.
This is your Sebastian Gomez. You've called it wild and complex. I love this. I've been drinking this for the last week. What's the story? Tell me the story.
So Sebastian Gomez. So we work with a couple of different... Colombia is one of those places that it's just immensely easy to obtain high quality coffee from Colombia. So you're spoilt for choice. So Colombia is... I just need to make sure that I get this correct. The only country that I have multiple sourcing agencies in, just because there's so much choice and there are so many producers, and they have year-round harvest. So they're a little bit unique in the sense that they're very, very easy to obtain fresh coffees year-round. Whereas if you go to somewhere like, for say, Rwanda, even though it sits fairly similar location geographically, obviously not in the same continent, but if you were to look at where it is relative to the equator, it's not so distant away from the equator line. If you were to look at a country like that, they actually only really get one harvest a year, and then they have a fly crop. So Colombia is a little bit more, you have a little bit more choice. So in addition to that, they also have really high quality wet mill facilities, which again is something that if you were to go to a place like Malawi, for example, they don't have very high quality wet mill facilities, or dry mill facilities, for example. So there's a lot of choice in Colombia. Why Sebastian Gomez? Well, his partnership sort of came about with us via one of the importing companies that I work really quite closely with, which is CoffeeNet. And it's quite a nice story actually about CoffeeNet, because way back in the day, I knew one of their reps really, really well, and I knew straight away that they were a company that I wanted to work with. And they own farms in Colombia themselves. Their entire family is based around farming, whereas it's not uncommon, but it's not common. Normally, the company is Western based, where they will have people go out to the farms to contract coffees from farmers. It's kind of unusual to have a situation where you get farmer contracting from farmer, where they both understand each other's, it's not easy to be a coffee farmer. So understanding each other's plights and difficulties is something that's quite important if you want to source responsibly and sustainably, which is something that we actually do want to do. So Sebastian Gomez, I'll be completely transparent. The way that we source most of our coffees is we put them on a table side by side, completely blind, and taste through them. And then usually what happens is that there are a few producers that we keep coming back to time and time again, because every single time they release a coffee, it's phenomenal. And this was one of those coffees. So we had everything blindly on the table, tasted them, and there were coffees that were 2, 3, 4 times the price, that it was not just eliminating from the table in a sort of best of 3. It was eliminating it from the table, period. It was just demolishing coffees 3 or 4 times the price, at the same kind of, that's something that we sort of instantly gravitated towards, because it also had this really nice sustainable partnership that we already had. So in terms of working with Sebastian's coffees, it's been a contract with us that's been quality based. So we've assessed the coffees and said, this is something that's phenomenal and we want to stick with this. So is that a relatively I just kind of started getting into a bit of word salad there, because my brain, I find it quite difficult to concentrate. So
no, it's great, and it's something that we spoke about on the last season a lot with a lot of roasts, and these partnerships are more important than ever, and kind of having sources you can trust. We are seeing weather devastate so many parts of the world and crops, and kind of relying on kind of just wholesale and whole trade is not working anymore. So having these partnerships is great. Why do you like this one? What stood out to you about this particular coffee? I mean, just for benefit, if you're thinking of picking up, it's some people love coffee flavor descriptions, some people hate it. I realize it's very divisive over some people. I put this in front of my dad and I'll tell him it's got white peach, strawberry coulis and Victoria sponge cake, and he'll spit it out and laugh in my face. But some people love it, and essentially it's very, very sweet. It's got that jammy note to it. It's got a really, really nice kind of sharpness from that strawberry coulis, like you said. I love it. So why did you fall in love with this particular one?
Uniqueness. It stood out on the table, and that's really hard to do as coffee. Yeah. The other thing as well is it was clearly not co-inoculated with anything, which is something that we have to be quite careful when we look out for, because it is something that happens. It's not something that is necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that we try to avoid where we can, unless there's something that's sort of groundbreaking. So co-inoculated coffees, if you get something that's, I'll take an obvious example, which is something like cinnamon, is a very, very uncommon flavor characteristic to find naturally occurring in coffees. So if you have a coffee that reeks of cinnamon, it sort of sets my alarm bells off a little bit.
Yeah.
And, it makes me wonder, is this a producer or a coffee that I can actually trust, has not been inoculated with anything? Because you start to run in all kinds of difficulties with allergen classes and things like that. You don't want to accept something, particularly in areas where there's less... It wouldn't be fair to describe it as anything other than less rigorous regulation on that sort of thing. So if we're taking a coffee that's co-inoculated with something, that is usually something that I can pick up and taste. And this one to me was very obviously not one of those. So we had this really quite interesting sponge-like character that I found repeatedly on the tasting table in a blind setting. And I found that particular element to it something that you can only really find in very complex coffees. So it was the complexity of the coffee that stood out. It was the straightforwardness of it as well. So it was very obviously yielding 3 different sets of characteristics for me. So or at the very least 2. So there was definitely a kind of sponge-like, cakey kind of character to me.
Yep.
There was that stone fruit thing going on. And then there was also this jamminess, this exactly like you've just described. So big sweetness, big stone fruit character, and big spongy character as well. And to get the triad there is something that is really quite unusual. Yep. The other thing as well is that natural coffees can sometimes get a little bit too ferment heavy. That's not something I enjoy personally. So when I buy coffees at Harmony, even though I do source for categories like wild and complex and things like that, my general assessment of it is if it's something that I wouldn't personally want to drink, it's something I don't want to sell. And so I picked this coffee because it had a lot of natural characteristics, but they were flavors I could really get behind. It still had some of that ferment characteristics for people who enjoy that kind of thing, but it wasn't over the top ferment character. It was enjoyable. It was well integrated. It was just a really classy, high quality cup of coffee and very, very consistent to roast. Pink Bourbon is also one of my favorite varieties. It's incredibly diverse in terms of, I should call it Rosado now. Variedad Rosado has become the new thing that people say. But I call it Pink Bourbon because that's just how I know it.
It's been forever. Yeah. This is the one I've been drinking a lot. I've brewed it multiple ways. Whether it's we're going to talk about tools and stuff in a bit, but AeroPress filter, stuck it through an espresso. Is that sponge is the profile that you just keep coming back to. In filter, we got that stone fruit was there so much more in the cafetiere, and that's what we're doing at home. I just love it. It's complex, but it's also not. And I've got a partner who doesn't really drink fancy coffees. I know she would like this. We're going to come on to a coffee in a minute. I know she really wouldn't. But I think this is your bread and butter, whilst also being really great on the palate if you can take them flavours out of it. So I'm really glad you recommended this one. I want to move away from coffee just because I can't brew one back to back. Well, not move away from coffee, but you ran a really interesting event not so long ago talking about my other passion, which is music. And when I saw it, I was like, I need to get to it. And unfortunately, I couldn't. But coffee and music pairing is something that was completely alien, certainly when I was first reading it. How did this come about? Like, what's the story here?
I actually can't take all the credit for this because it wasn't my idea. It was my idea, but it wasn't my idea. So I actually borrowed this from Aiken Humphreys in Harrogate. They did a wine and music evening, and it was a similar kind of thing. But I thought this would actually also really work quite well for coffee. And the way that they kind of did it ran slightly differently to what I did it. So I won't talk so much about how they ran it. But for me, I think about coffee quite frequently as almost like characters. So it's common for me to describe coffees as being polite, which I just sort of mean refrained, very courteous to one's palate. It's gentle and not in your face and spiky or anything like that. And then you can also describe a coffee as very extroverted, which is, it's kind of like the opposite. Not that I'm saying extroverted people are impolite, but So that would be a coffee that's got extremely loud characteristics. It's like a speaker where everything's been dialed up to 11. So you can find coffees like that, usually quite funky coffees, and you can find ones that are usually washed coffees, which are very polite, very gentle, very. It's almost like everything's been taken down a notch, but it's still really well integrated. So I think about it naturally in that way anyway. And I thought it would be kind of interesting because I also sort of think about music that way as well. And so the way that I wanted to run it, we did it as a public thing. So I went away and I chose a load of songs that I thought worked quite well as a characterization of the coffee. So I characterized the coffee as a person, and then I thought, well, if this person was a song, what song would they be? And it's kind of like that. So eventually what we ended up doing was taking them to people and doing this at a shop called Sale Moon, which is in Manchester, or just in Sale. And then from there, we had lots and lots of people show up, probably I think it was about 15 people. I might be wrong on that, might be fewer. But they all showed up. We brewed them coffees. We said, right, take an aromatic assessment of this. Think about the emotions. What does it make you feel? Does it bring any words to mind? Don't use any coffee description words. Just think about characterizations. Does this remind you of summer? Does this remind you of warm? Does this remind you of cold? Does this remind you of rainy day? Does this remind you of beach? Does this remind you of driving through the mountains with the breeze coming through because you're in a Corvette and the windows down and it's going through your hair? Like any kind of imagery that comes to mind, what does that say to you? And then do that again for the taste. And then we played the songs over it and said, okay, well, you've just come up with your own assessment for this. How well do these songs pair with your assessment of the coffees that you've just put together? Mm-hmm. And funny enough, lots of people, we made them like, I had to think about it in sense of, these have to be things that I personally think pair quite well with it, but I want to make it varied. So we had some jazzy kind of characteristics. We had some classical music. We had some pop music from the 80s and 90s, and just had a general, a large array of different genres that also kind of work together. And then at the end, we collected the crowd responses and said, is there a definitive winner for this coffee as to what pairs best with it? And for all of the coffees, apart from one where it was like it won by like 1 point or something, all of the coffees had a definitive answer. So the coffee that you're drinking now, sadly, was not involved in the tasting, but the one that you're going to drink, according to the crowd, tasted like George Michael's Freedom.
Right.
I personally thought it had a little bit of Vivaldi going on, but I was dead certain. Like, I had that come through and I was like, that's it. It's Vivaldi. It's Vivaldi's Four Seasons Spring Symphony. Tasted it. Yep, Vivaldi. And then we made it on the day and everyone was like, this is George Michael. So
I'm looking forward to getting into it. It just sounds so. Plans to do more things like that and more events.
Yeah, I've already spoken to. I mean, just this week we've got. Just this week? No, it's 2 weeks time. So today's the 10th, and it's on the 14th. We're going to be in Scarborough at. Gosh, it sounds like I'm doing a gig or something. It's in Scarborough, at Coda, and. At Coda, we're going to be doing just a public tasting, so nothing themed per se, just lots of nice coffees, which is great because Coda's a really lovely shop, and I really enjoy every single time I go over there. So it's a nice experience for me to go anyway. But in addition to that, they also have a great crowd of people that are really into coffee. So we always end up with some really good conversations.
Yeah.
And lots of good discussions about the coffee, and also got like 4 or 5 new ones to release at the same time, because the coffees that are on the offer list at the moment are very, very low quantities. Like most of them are, I'm on to the last batch or the second to last batch. So yeah, it'd be nice to release a lot of new ones and have them there.
So, bro, where did you end us? You're on 45. So,
Uh,
what's to come? Have we got any new kind of origin countries, or are you sticking with on all
yes,
your new releases?
we
Where are you taking us?
the next coffee that's coming out is going to be from East Timor, which
Nice.
I think I'm allowed as a person, a flawed human being. I'm allowed to have a favorite country. It's not necessarily my favorite country to drink coffee from. I'm not going to say what that is, but it's definitely my favorite country to source coffee from, because it's just such a unique place, and it's so interesting. And every single time I learn more stuff about it, it just becomes a whole nother layer of, like, I'm quite interested. I'm very detail oriented, and so I really like the fine details of what the nuances and little specialties of each coffee are going to yield me, and the stories behind each of them. So the coffees from East Timor come from because it's incredibly hard to source export and import logistics from East Timor. We have to use a specialist in order to do that. But we started with 90 kilos, it might have even been 30 kilos from East Timor in 2022 via our friends at Cast Organics. And now we're up to 1.5 tons, which is roughly, it's something like 15% of their export volume. So it's quite a chunk. And for us to, as a small business, like, make a dent in their export is quite strong, for us to be able to do that. But there's the interesting part about East Timor is that it's kind of got like most places on the equator, it's got a wet season and a dry season, because of the sort of Coriolis forces and the storms and stuff that happen throughout the year. But in the wet season, it's not a very wealthy place, let's put it like that. And a lot of the roads are made of sort of compact soil and temporary. They're very temporary, and you can't drive trucks on them during the wet season. You can't drive anything on them during the wet season, because you look and half of the road is missing. So in the mountains, which is where the coffee tends to grow, in Letifojo region, you are basically entirely stranded for 6 months of the year, because the rainy season starts and it doesn't stop. And so the rains come and they wash all the road away, and all of the farmers there are self-sufficient. And, then they do their harvesting and stuff for the year. And then right at the end of the wet season, the dry season comes, everyone rebuilds the road, and then they start getting the lorries up and, bringing down the stuff from the mountains. And so everything is has to run like clockwork, in order to get it exported on time. So it's really interesting, because most of the coffees have like a slightly longer fermentation period than normal. Yeah. And the more I work with the East Timori farmers, Morn Samau and Carlos Dedeus and all of the team over there, the more interested I get every single time. Like this year, we had a phone call. Must have been about September time. It's also it's a notoriously bad place for internet connectivity. So trying to phone people on WhatsApp, you're lucky if you get half an hour. But we phoned up on WhatsApp, and Morn Samau was very excited to show us the model farm and talk us through all of the leguminous intercropping that he was doing, which is basically planting trees that work via the mycelium web to give some nutrients in times of, sort of drought, and then take on nutrients and moisture during times where there's lots and lots of rainfall. So it's a giver and a taker tree, which is like absolutely ideal, because it keeps the consistency of the soil very, very samey throughout the year, and the roots go quite deep, so it holds the topsoil in quite well, and all kinds of stuff. So it's very, very exciting every time I get East Timori coffees. So I've got 3 from them. The Hatuhe lot that we've worked with for the last couple of years with Carlos. I got some coffees from Morn Samau at Eritoi. And then I also got my first ever lot of East Timori Naturals, which I may have attempted to roast on Wednesday, and we screwed that up slightly. But I'm gonna drink it still, because it's still really nice.
But how does all of that talking about the production and the problems with the weather affect the cost, because the Timor-Leste, East Timor, that you don't see it very regular over here, and a lot of people do cite cost. I hate talking about money when it comes to coffee, because I will always spend money on great coffee, whatever it is. But for you as an importer and a purchaser, is it more expensive than getting something from Colombia? Is it high grade? Is it high quality coffee, or is it? Because I don't know much about it at all.
East Timor is beyond surprisingly excellent. Because it's not a very large country. It's a very small place, and it's very comparatively to a lot of places, it wouldn't qualify as being like exceptionally high altitude. There's a it's a small island, and there's a small growing region within that island, and they don't make a lot of coffee, and they don't have a lot of budget, and they don't have the same wet mill facilities that are available in places like Colombia. But at the same time, the coffees that come out of East Timor, I get them here and I taste them and I go, oh my God, this is amazing. This is really high quality stuff that comes out. So Indonesia in general is blessed with really great terroir, especially sort of the primary growing regions in Indonesia. But East Timor is no longer a part of Indonesia. So it's interesting to see what they've done by themselves as an independent nation that runs differently to how mainland. Well, I don't think there's a way of describing East Timor, describing Indonesia as anything mainland. There's but they do things differently over in East Timor, and the coffees that they pump out relative to the size that they have, because you'd expect with like any kind of quality based item that there's a distribution, right? So what's the average quality, and then the more volume that you add, you're going to end up with more coffees stacking up at the higher end of the distribution, just as a matter of sort of mathematical calculus. But for some reason, East Timori coffees seem to have shifted out to the right in terms of output quality relative to how much they produce. So there's still quite a decent quantity of coffees available that on the point score might score 85, 86, 87, in spite of the fact that they really don't produce a hell of a lot of coffee compared to places like Brazil, which make a lot of coffee. But it seems easier for me to find 86-point East Timori coffees than it does to find 86-point Brazilian coffees. So, but in terms of price point, there may be 10% more expensive, but I don't mind that. I'm very happy to but I mean, part of that is that it's shipped from so far away. There's not exactly a shortcut to get from East Timor to here. And if I'm just trying to think what the quickest way is. It's probably to go through the Red Sea and go via the Suez Canal. So I know that last year there was some problems shipping anything through the Suez because the ships were getting sort of missiled. But I don't know if that's still very strong. I don't know.
Not sure. So that'll be really exciting. So I am now drinking what I've been waiting a couple of weeks for. You told me this was one of your favourites that you've got on. You say when you very rarely get a chance to get coffees like this. So this is George Michael Freedom in a cup. Is obviously how it's been described. Tell me the story before I give. I mean, well, actually, no. It's so clean. Like obviously, when you have it back to back with your kind of spungy, lovely Colombian, it's like drinking water in terms of the cleanliness of it. You've described it with mango, puree, bergamot, pineapple, lemongrass. That lemongrass really comes through on the aftertaste. It's so fragrant. In terms of
it's intensely floral.
It's great.
I mean, when we describe things as bergamot, there's kind of two things that you can think of. You can think of bergamot, the citrus fruit, or you can think of bergamot as in bergamot oil, like you might find in Earl Grey tea. And for me, I think you get a little bit of both. You get that kind of citrusy bergamot, and you also get that Earl Grey style of bergamot that's really aromatic and floral and fragrant. And you also find this intensely pleasurable. I find lemongrass like characteristic, and then this big sweetness. Especially if it depends a little bit how you brew that coffee. Like as espresso, you kind of maximize everything. It's like taking something and then restricting it into a very small space. So all of that sweetness just gets maximized, and you end up with something that's almost like a puree to drink. It's really, really super high sweetness. So in terms of the actual story behind this one, this was probably the luckiest purchase I've ever managed to do in a very, very long time of buying coffees. The actual purchase sort of happened. I was the very first person to try these coffees because this was in York, actually. One of the suppliers that we work with who help us out a lot with sourcing coffees from Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, and Ethiopia as well. They also work with Malawi, and in the past they've worked with Madagascar, and I think they're doing a bit with Tanzania and Zimbabwe and Zambia and places like that. So they work all in East Africa and moving south. But this was the first coffee that they were looking at from Ethiopia. And I rocked up at their little office space, went up the stairs, and they were sort of preparing, and they were like, "Oh, just in time. We're about to taste some Ethiopian coffees." And they got all the coffees out, and I was smelling them, and I was like, "God, these are all really, really nice." You know, yeah. And Ethiopia had a really good season this year. So it's great to rock up and see Ethiopia while it's having a great season, because when they're great, they're really, really great. And when they're having a bad season, they're still kind of good. But this was an absolute peak season for Ethiopia. So we turned up, tasted a lot of the coffees, and one of the coffees really, really stood out to me on the end of the table. And I said, "What's that? How much is it? How much do you have?" And they looked at the packaging and they said, "That's the anaerobic natural from Basha Bakili, and there's 10 sacks of coffee available, and we don't know how much it is." And I said, "Well, I don't care kind of how much it is. Just give me 2 sacks of that and I'll have that, and I'll put it on the offer list." Originally, I was going to put it on as wild and complex, but I was really excited about this, and I was like, "Yes, my first like proper Ethiopian coffee that I've gone in, tasted and sourced it while it's still been on the trees." And then as time went on, I started getting messages going, "Hey, how many sacks of that Ethiopian coffee did you say again? Because we're kind of not thinking we might make up the volume, and we're unsure if we want to import it. Like, do you want us to air freight it?" And I was like, if the choice is air freight or don't have it, I will have it air freighted, but I don't like air freighting. So if you are going to put it on a container, I'll have it on the container. And they were like, "Okay, well, we'll think about it." And in the end, they did decide to container it, and we ended up getting the coffees. It came late because of the disruption through the strait through, I just said it, Suez. There was disruption there, so it was a little bit late coming. But we then tasted the coffees again, and they just kept getting better and better and better, which is a sign of a really good coffee, is that it opens up and then you leave it to rest and you taste it again and it opens up more, and you taste it again, it opens up again. And later we then found out that the 10 sacks that were on reserve had then gone to being only 2 sacks because the other 8 had been siphoned off and entered into a competition. So I ended up getting the only 2 sacks that were available, and the competition that was entered to was called the Cup of Excellence, which is essentially like the Olympics, but for coffee producing farmers.
Yeah, it's just a little tiny competition.
Tiny competition, like only the largest competition possible. And Ethiopia doesn't exactly have a small entry pool. There's quite a lot, and it's the home of coffee, so there's quite a lot of high quality producers that send into this. It's not quite. I'm unsure if it's on the same sort of scale as the Gesher Village auctions, but I think that's mainly marketing. Like this really is the big competition, and it won. So I have to be really careful with how I describe this, because there's 2 ever so slight differences in the way that the coffees come to me. So the first coffees that come to me come as green beans that are ready to roast. That's how I receive the coffee. The Cup of Excellence competition received the same lot of coffee, but they received it as parchment, and then they did their own milling process. So I can't describe them as being the same coffees, but I can describe them as having come from the same lot. So we're really lucky, because that sort of thing never happens. And I've looked around and I haven't seen these coffees around at all. I've seen coffees from Basha Bakili, but they're always washed coffees or they're natural coffees. They're never the same anaerobic Morago lot that we had. So massive stroke of luck. So if you were to purchase the coffee that won the Cup of Excellence, which essentially is really close to the same thing, but not quite, because they've been milled differently, and they come from different sections of the farm. Like some producers will choose certain trees to submit the coffees to because they get ideal amounts of sunlight, or they're in the shade, or something like that. But we got the coffees through, and we were thinking about how do we price this, because it's an expensive coffee as it is, but it's now won the Cup of Excellence. And if we were to buy a coffee, the coffee that had won was purchased by a roaster in LA for pretty much the equivalent of $1,000 per kilo. And so we were like, well, how does 20 quid a bag even sound? So that's what I put it on for. And a couple of people have come back to me going, hey, this coffee that you've sent us is really, really nice. We think it's great value for money. And we're, yes, yeah, there's a reason for that. But yeah, decided not to take a big profit on that one and just sort of sell it, because my philosophy was I'd rather have, because I had some friends who, they run quite successful businesses of their own, and got some advice from them, and their advice was, what you should do is you should approach a really high quality hotel and tell them that they can have the whole thing exclusively for 600 quid a kilo. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. What I'll do instead is I'll sell it, and I'll try and get as many people to taste it as possible, because that's going to really help to boost our public profile, rather than a hotel somewhere that doesn't really care that much, that's just bought it because it had the word exclusive on. So we didn't do that, and I'm kind of glad that we did. It would have been nice to have that money, but I'm not a money horse. So.
Yeah, and then go and butcher it by over extracting it in a terrible espresso.
Yeah, and then I don't get to have any, you see. So it's nice to go to coffee shops and try it made by people who are actual experts in their given field. So it's always nice for me to go to a shop like Sail Moon or Siop Shop or something like that, and turn up and have a coffee that I roasted made way better, because someone has sat down and spent time dialing it in properly, rather than just to sort of take a paycheck. So yeah.
And this is part of your, as far as marketing goes, your masterpieces series of coffees. How do you determine what a masterpiece is? What's your criteria?
The rule with masterpieces, so it might be easy to start with Wild and Complex and how that differs. So Wild and Complex, all of the coffees that we try to put on does what it says on the tin. So Wild and Complex, you're expecting something that's really like, it's got a high intensity, it's got layers of complexity, and it's wild. So I spent a long time thinking about what words to use. So we've also got bright and fruity. Those are coffees that are bright, effervescent. They've got a lot of acidity. They're fruit forward. We've got out of the ordinary. Those are coffees that are unusual. There's something about them that is unusual, whether it's an unusual variety, unusual country of origin, unusual flavor description, those kinds of things. Easy drinker, something that's very easy to palate. Masterpieces is your Claude Monets of the coffee realm. It's more art than it is. It's drinkable art forms, and so with the masterpieces coffees, essentially, I look for something that conveys something to me that is something that I just would not find, apart from maybe once a year, in its given thing. So we had one from China, and China is a new and upcoming origin, but it's very unusual to find Chinese coffees that are really at the upper echelons.
Yep. And
this one blew me away. And so I thought, there's only one place that can go. It's the best Chinese coffee that I've had this year by a massive standard deviation. So but because it's the best by an order of magnitude, I've got to take it and put it in masterpieces because it's phenomenal. So it's essentially the best possible coffees that we can find in any given year.
Yeah.
And then they're categorized as masterpieces. It made sense to make this coffee a masterpieces because it's the best coffee produced in Ethiopia this year, and Ethiopia makes a lot of coffee. So, there's no other place it can go. So, yeah, and it was also the most amount of coffee we've ever put into a masterpieces range. Like normally, where they're a little bit more expensive or a lot more expensive in some cases, we had one that we had no option but to sell it for £25 a bag. And I'm sure there'll be more in the future that we'll have to sell for 30 or 40 or 50 just to, because coffee gets expensive when it gets good. It's like wine, it scales very, very quickly. But we were thinking about this one, and normally we get 20 kilos of coffee, and that's plenty. That will last several months. And so all of a sudden we had 120 and thinking, I wonder if that's ever going to sell, but there's no other place it can go. So we have the very last 10 kilos of it, and I roasted that on Wednesday, and that's it. And after that, it's gone. So not a sales pitch, but I'm just saying we've managed to get through it, which I was not expecting at all. So, yeah.
I was just going to talk about price point because since I've really got into coffee, and it's probably been 7 or 8 years now, I'm certainly not seasoned, but you would go and buy a bag of OK coffee for 6, 7, 8 quid maybe, and now you are looking at, obviously look at your previous employers, loads of great roasters in the UK, and you are seeing that average now creep up and seriously creep up in some levels. Are you finding consumers are just happy to kind of pay big bucks for really good coffee? Do you think that where I always felt there was a gap between the beer and the coffee worlds, and this was 2 years ago, was beer education is fairly, higher percentage equals higher price, equals probably slightly higher quality if it's from a great brewery.
Yeah.
The whole, is this a good coffee? How do I know? Is it a good coffee? That education to the general public has never really been there in the same way as for beer and wine. So how are you finding public perception to coffee nowadays?
I think I'm almost a weird exemption to this, because I happen to have situated myself extremely comfortably in the market where I'm less affected by putting my prices up. I don't, because I like to make sure that all of the coffees we have are bargains. I don't want to be known as someone who, because there are coffee roasteries in the UK who have a reputation for charging a very large amount of money for something that's actually really quite disappointing. And I'd rather be the opposite. That's a personal choice. It's not a choice that we are mandated to do. But that being said, occasionally there are coffees where the quality that it's come out at, I've thought, we've paid X and we could sell it for Y. So let's sell it for Y minus 10%, because that's still, as far as I'm concerned, delivering really good value for money. And we've ended up still making like a fairly decent margin on it. But as far as the actual coffee price thing has happened, there's across the industry been probably a 30% increase in green coffee prices. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I can tell you exactly where it started. So it started with our old friend, the Suez Canal. Do you remember where it got blocked up like a couple of years ago? There was that container ship that blocked it. That caused a huge backlog in ports. And it caused a backlog of port slots leaving Brazil. It caused a backlog of port slots leaving Dar es Salaam and Djibouti and Indonesia. There was just this whole backlog because there's quite a number of container ships that pass through the Suez Canal every single day, and it's a big decision for a business like Maersk or someone like that to say, hey, I really think we should just go the long way around and get the coffee there 4 days quicker rather than wait for this container ship to be hauled out the way and we'll just sit here on the water. So that's where it started. So there was that huge backlog of probably 100, 200, 300 container ships just sat there waiting to go through into the Med. And all of a sudden, that also happened to coincide with a lot of Chinese mining companies in Brazil buying up a lot of the Brazilian port slots. So the price of containers was the first thing to go up in price that directly impacted the cost of coffee. So you were looking maybe 4 years ago, if you were unfortunate, you'd be paying $2,000 for a container slot, maybe $1,500. And then pretty soon overnight, that went all the way to $9,000, sometimes upwards of $12,000. So if you've got 24,000 kilos or 18,000, kilos of coffee in a container, your cost per kilo of coffee just in shipping costs, without any other real warehousing or handling fees, really gets impacted extremely quickly. So that then gets passed on and everyone has margins to work to, so that very quickly made the price of coffee go up straight away, £1 a kilo, immediate impact. In some cases, £2, some £3 a kilo, but immediate impact. Later on, there were climate-related problems. So we had a lot of frosts in Brazil. So frost is unusual, but it's not so unusual that it never happens. It happens infrequently, and it's so that the main affected region is in southern Brazil, and there has to be a kind of perfect storm, if you like, because the only bit of land that produces very, very cold weather near the southern South America is Antarctica. So you produce those extremely cold conditions in Antarctica and have a very strong northerly breeze that takes it up past the highlands, and it will impact southern Brazil. I'm not quite sure on the exact conditions that have to happen to make that possible. I believe it's also like abnormally low pressure or something like that. I'll have to chat to my friend Cal to see exactly what that is. But long story short is that in a region that's normally sort of 20 to 24 degrees year round, the temperature can drop down to like 2 or 3 degrees and will pretty much kill the harvest in the world's largest coffee producing region. So it produces about 50%. I'm talking about Minas Gerais, which is in southern Brazil. So if you were to look at it on a map, there's Argentina, then there's like the southern part of Brazil, and then a little bit higher up there's Minas Gerais. So it's quite near Argentina, but not like close. It's still a drive. So that area was affected quite heavily by frosts, and that seemed to happen a number of times. Now I need to be careful because I don't know the exact number, but it definitely happened more than one time. I think it happened twice, but it could have happened more. And that pretty much wiped out that crop for that year. It didn't kill the plants, but they didn't fruit properly. And so, that happened. So that was the next thing that happened that led to a big increase in price, because you've got the world's largest coffee exporter and the largest region within that exporter missing a sort of season. And people still want their coffee, even if it's not coming from Brazil, but coming from Guatemala or Colombia or somewhere else. And there have been all sorts of problems. There have been floods in Rwanda. Rwanda produces a fair amount of coffee. There's been very arid conditions, droughts in Ethiopia and places like that over the years. So lots of places are impacted primarily by weather, but it was kind of exacerbated at exactly the same time with the ports problem that came out of the Suez Canal blockage. Then we also had the other problem with containers earlier this year, again with our friend the Suez Canal. And so that again led to another backlog where places were forced to make a decision when we're leaving the port of Djibouti. Do we want to go around the Horn and go the long way, or do we want to wait and try and go through the Gibraltar Strait through the Suez Canal? And some made decision A, some made decision B, but ultimately there were still delays and people still wanted their coffee. So this sort of demonstrated a little bit of price elasticity for coffee, because people all of a sudden were either having to pay more or certainly willing to pay a little bit more to get their coffee. And the prices, once they go up, is sort of hard to bring them down again, because, you know, it's like if you can sell 100 like kilos of coffee for £28 a kilo as a producer, and then the next year the same people that you sold the same coffee to only want to pay £15, you've got a lot more negotiating power to say, well, you paid 28 last year, like we're willing to do you a good deal and make it 22. But the price overall has still gone up from maybe where it was at 15. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing for producers. That's great for producers. That's really good, and we should be encouraging producers to barter more and to get good quality deals for themselves. It just impacts the consumers and the coffee shops. So it's great for producers. It's less good for cafes and coffee roasters and consumers. But ultimately, if people are still, the overall impact on the price of a cup of coffee has not like massively increased. So at the very, very end consumer level, it's not made a huge impact. It's going to over time. But I mean, we've been saying that for 10 years and it hasn't really massively impacted. Like the price of a flat white, you can still go and get a £3 flat white. But 10 years ago, it might have been £2.50. So 50p extra over the course of 10 years. Some places in London, you're paying £4. I think generally speaking, the larger thing that's going to push it is the specialty movement, where it's becoming more popular because specialty coffee has a smaller pool of supply, just because of the nature of it. It's quite where you're searching for something that is in the upper echelons of quality, more people purchasing from that small little cream off the top, that has to split more ways, and so that's naturally going to bring the price up.
That is extremely educational, and the bloody Suez, that canal, who knew? That's what causes all the problems.
We should build another one. We should build another one. I think we need like a Suez Canal Part 2. Maybe wide enough for 2 boats.
Maybe, yeah, that'd be all right, wouldn't it? I would
like
love to see the
a Suez motorway.
That.
That would be it. Yeah.
A flyover.
We've currently got the Suez B road, and I think we need the Suez motorway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's time for an A road.
Though the M25 still gets blocked, so
it does. Yes, as does pretty much any road in this country. I just want to. I've kept you way too long. I wanted to. One more question before we finally kind of wrap up with the podcast is all about your achievements in competition. Now, we're not going to talk about all of them, but have you got any that stand out for you as kind of something you're really proud of? I know that's where kind of the name Harmony came from. It was in competition, which you might want to touch on.
It was a joke.
But what? Yeah, but it's read about. But is there anything that's really stood out to you as something you're proud of in competition?
I think this is going to sound awful. I think no. I think the one that I was really pleased to get was third place in latte art, but I didn't deserve it, and so that felt in its own unique way, because I was extremely busy with work and I didn't have the time to put together a routine that was a proper routine, and so I turned up with no script, with nothing, and I made it up on the day. I had to borrow some equipment off of friends, and then I walked away with a trophy. So there was part about that which was like, it was bittersweet because it's one that I really wanted. But at the end of the day, I came away thinking, God, I got a bit lucky there. I don't think I deserved it. And a really good friend of mine was beaten into fourth place, which, to be honest, was really... That was the part that I really enjoyed, because he's been wanting trophies for a very long time, and he finally put like everything he had, and he made a tiny spillage that like stole a couple points off his score sheet, and I rocked up and took it by a couple of points. But I remember like leaving that hosted in London, and I remember leaving the venue going, I think I did okay. I think I did okay on like day one. Like there's day one and day two. I was like, I think I did it okay. And we were staying at my partner's friend's place that she was renting with like 6 other people, and we were sleeping on these 2 sofas that they pushed together. And we hadn't planned to stay the night if I didn't get through and just go home. And I was like, oh my God, I'm really sorry. I got an email through at 11 o'clock at night saying, you're going to be in the final. And I was like, oh, great. I kind of wanted to go to bed, but that's fine. So that was the first one. I was really happy with that one. I was happy with the outcome, but there was that kind of bittersweet, did I actually deserve it? Then there was the second competition, which I think overall is probably a better pedigree of achievement, which is the UK Barista Championships heats in Bristol, which I won. And there happened to be a lot of very, very high quality competitors entering the competition at the same time as me. All of them extremely, extremely capable, and on their day would have done extremely well as well. And I happened to come away from that one with a win, which has never happened at that level of competition. So I was very happy to do that. But that was another one where, again, I was very, very busy at work. I was representing my old company, who I won't say were unhelpful, because they still gave me the coffee and I still had some time to train. But I think I was the wrong person to be doing it in that company. I think if I was a different person, I'd have had more allocation to more resources to train. Like I say, I don't want to talk too badly, because I did get the competition help, but it was very much on my own time, and I'd sort of hoped for a little bit more guidance because it was my first time doing the Barista Championships. But I did it by myself, came up with a routine, and then the head of coffee for the company at the time, I said, it was the day before the competition, I was like, I just want to show you my script. Can you tell me what you think about it? And he's a very honest guy, and he read the script with me out loud, and then he was like, yeah, so I think you should change like all of this. And I was like, well, that's a bit late now. It's a bit late. Because he knew I was entering the competition. He was like, I should probably spend 5 minutes with the guy just to sort of see what his competition routine is going to be like, give him some last minute advice. And his advice was scrap the whole thing and start again.
Scrap it. So with no advice on how to make it better.
No, he rewrote a script. But I was like, there's no way I'm going to learn all this. So I'm just going to trust my gut. His feedback was well stated, which is that it was way too abstract. Because I am interested quite frequently in just complex ideas, and it was all about the Proust effect and how coffee can transport you to places and essentially almost give you like flashbacks, a little bit like Lost, the TV series. So if you drink something and you have this sort of transformative experience where you're taken back to like Grandma's kitchen or something like that, where you smell jasmine tea or whatever, that's one of the I was describing, and I was describing how that works and things like that. And he was like, yeah, the judges are not going to get this at all. You're wasting your time. Like, talk more on the coffee. And so on the day, I made it up pretty much. I had a script, but I forgot half of it. But I did fine. So yeah, I finished, you get 7 minutes allocated. And in all my practice runs, I was taking 6 minutes, 45 seconds. And on the day, I finished in 5 minutes 40, and I was like, that's kind of strange. But it turns out I forgot half the routine. So still did okay. Yeah.
Take the win. Right, we're going to wrap up on music. So again, this is the first episode of the new series. Anyone who hasn't listened before, we have I was about to call it the old one, a Brew Odyssey playlist, which we will build out over the course of this series. So interestingly, last time, so in the first series, episode 1, I'm going to tell you the 3 tracks that were chosen, and then we'll see what you come up with. So we had Stage by Avenged Sevenfold. So we went heavy rock, straight away. When Will I Be Famous by Bros, which I can't remember who this was. I remember episode 1. It could have been it was the guys from Brew York.
Oh, really?
and self-esteem by the Offspring. So we had a bit of rock, and then the Bros thing obviously cut through it completely. So we've changed the rules a little bit this time. So we're still going high school because I love hearing what kind of defined everyone's high school generation. If it's beer, we'll talk about the kind of perfect taproom song, but with coffee, we'll talk about the perfect coffee shop or the one you want to listen to when you're chilling, listening, drinking coffee. And then miscellaneous, you give us a bit of an insight into your musical world. So you are going to be the first three entries in the playlist, so no pressure on the season 2 playlist. But where are you taking us? Take us back to high school first.
High school first. Gosh, that's such an interesting one. I mean, when I was in sort of the proverbial equivalent of high school, the track of the year was Gangnam Style. So I really maybe I should be that guy and just ruin everyone's evening by throwing gang. But I think there's something quite nostalgic about that. You know, it was a kind of period of time where everyone, no one really worried so much about stuff. So I don't know. Although people were really worried about 2012 ending the world, weren't they? Because they'd seen that film, and then there was that Mayan prediction and stuff, and everyone was like, "Oh, the world's going to end."
And instead, it just skyrocketed a K-pop guy to
instead
stardom.
we got. Well, in some ways, it was the end of the world. It was the end of music. No. Poor. So I might take 30 seconds just to think about this.
You don't want to get it wrong. This will be next to your name forever. There'll be a blog. There'll be everything. Do you want to be associated with Gangnam Style for the rest of your career?
I just don't know if I can be that much of a meme. Gosh.
Because you already know straight away that's the clip I'd be using on social media to kind of present this podcast and tease people. It's, Ben Rowe loves Gangnam Style.
Really, please don't tempt me because that will happen. Ooh. I think I'm going to have to reject the prospect of Gangnam Style, although it's extremely tempting. I might go for So we also used to listen a lot to Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, which I'm debating if that's better or worse than Gangnam Style, because it's in some ways it's a little bit more cringe. But I think it's slightly less cringe than Gangnam Style. Like I don't know if it comes across,
but it is better.
I was not the popular kid at school. I was the nerd at school, sadly. So I think I'm just going to have to go with Another One Bites the Dust and live forever understanding that was the only thing I could think of.
That's fine. We're still going to use Gangnam Style on the teaser clip.
Yeah, that sounds great.
That coffee song then, that either chilling out or coffee shop vibe. Are we going George Michael Freedom?
I think we have to. I think we have to go George Michael Freedom. If I'm not going to put out Gangnam Style, I have to put out George Michael Freedom.
That's fine. I need to. You created a playlist from that night, didn't you? I'll have to have a look.
Yes, I did. Yeah, it's on the website. So there's a blog post that we put up.
I'll find it, and then an insight into your musical world. Then you can have anything you want to round us off and round the podcast. So
I have a really sort of eclectic taste of music, and the way that I approach things is I just binge something for 50 or 60 replays, and then I'm on to the next thing. I really like a lot of old school hip hop. I really like a lot of neoclassical, which is pretty much as far away from old school hip hop as you can get. I listen to a lot of piano concertos, and I'm really not selling myself. And then weirdly,
I'm just waiting for 2012 K-pop.
Well, there's a little bit of Gangnam Style and 2012 K-pop in there. There's also I've got a weird eclectic mix of Fred again, and then also C. Duncan, and then there's, as a real spanner in the works, although I don't know if I can be associated with this, which is Sleep Token, which is just this heavy, boisterous sort of heavy metal, which there's something really satisfying about it that I enjoy listening to. And then there's also...
I would just at risk of the camera, I'm not going to do it, but I do have a Sleep Token t-shirt on under this hoodie.
Oh, no way.
That is... I am a huge Sleep Token fan.
Yeah. And then there's Foria as well, which I just find really gorgeous piece of music. So, uh, the one that I was obsessed with for the longest, I'm going to throw this in just because it's a really eclectic piece of music to break up the train of all the others, which is it's a piece by Angus MacRae, and that's MAC and then RAE, and then Angus spelt like Aberdeen Angus burger. And it's called Flame, and it's got this really, really long introduction, like 4 or 5 minutes, and then all of the symphony parts come together and you get this huge finish that's just great. So it's a neoclassical piece, so it's
Nice.
yeah, and then
Lovely.
there's those nice violins and cellos going on as well.
Nice. That's that. And this is the beauty of this playlist, because after 50 episodes, we will have the most random. I love the last one and just click and shuffle on it, because all the coffee guys always brought in a little bit of class. I mean, I know we did just about bring in some class at the end, but and then
it
you
didn't
get these
start
brewers
well.
who either. But I still remember that my favorite episode, when I think it was, oh my goodness, who was it? It was someone from down south. And last time we did the last song you listened to, so literally they had to go and look at, right, what was the last thing you listened to, and that was it. It was Against Your Name Forever, and he just put his kids to bed and they've been watching telly, so it was the Paw Patrol theme song was the last thing, and that's in the playlist forever, next to their name. So it's cool. It's good.
Well, mine was "Holler If You Hear Me" by Tupac. So, which is
a little bit different to Angus MacRae, I imagine.
It's so different. I don't know. I really struggle with attention spans, and so sometimes I need something that's like big and booming, like a Sleep Token, and sometimes I need something that's just gonna take the edge off of my brain going 1,000 miles an hour. So, yeah.
Love it. I've really enjoyed that. So you get your 30-second sales pitch, or as long as you want. But where can people find you? You know, obviously you've got the Harmony website. But you've got Just Brew as well. And do you want to talk about that at all? Or where can people spend money with you?
So, I mean, I absolutely hate selling, which is why the first person I hired helped me with selling, because you kind of need to do it if you have some sort of business. But in terms of, if someone decides stupidly that what they want to do is spend money after listening to me talk for an hour, the place to go is, there's harmonycoffee.co.uk. The other place is justbrew.co.uk, and they do two different things. So Harmony Coffee is if you want to support my coffee and my roasting with my own sourcing, and Just Brew is if you want to try a large selection of other people's stuff. So it's not there. Sometimes Harmony Coffee features, but this month we've got Skylark from like down near Brighton Way, and then we also have Campbell and Syme from like Northside London. And so it's and last month we had Sanctuary Coffee, and we've had North Star before. So we've had Scottish roasters, Irish roasters, all over the place. Going to start getting more international stuff. So if you want to try lots and lots of different coffees, that's a good place. If you want to, if you think that the Harmony style is something you'd like to support repeatedly, then that's the place to go, is harmonycoffee.co.uk. And you can try those leguminous intercroppings from East Timor.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. Can't wait for them to come out. And you are regularly featured in a lot of York cafes. I'm not going to list them all, but if you certainly head down Fosgate, Warmgate Way, and then the Red Goat Climbing Wharf, you're likely to find something on. I've really enjoyed that. It's been ridiculously educational compared to some of the beery ones that we put out, where I just get hammered with brewers. So I really appreciate your time. I said we'd take an hour, we've taken a lot longer. So massively appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to some of your events.
There's probably 55
up.
Minutes of word salad in what I've said, though. So there's some editing to.
When it comes to the edit, it'll be a 4-minute podcast. No, it'll be
it'll be 30 seconds. It'll literally be the chat about Gangnam Style and nothing else.
It'll be the bit where you change location. We'll go with that way. No, really fun, really educated. Honestly, great. That Ethiopian is stunning. I look forward to more orders. But yeah, thank you for joining me
No
today.
problem. Well, thank you for the invitation. It's always good to do something like this. So much fun.
First episode of the series. It's good to be back. We've got I'm not going to go into who we've got coming up, but we've got some amazing brewers. We've got some top quality roasters, not just from England, but from across Europe coming on in the next few weeks. So subscribe, like, do all that stuff. I'm just as bad at selling as anyone else. So just listen to it.
I thought
And
you
if you're
did
enjoying it,
marketing.
that's great. I do marketing. I'm not good at selling myself. God, I'm
See, I come from a
terrible at
world
that.
where they're one and the same thing.
No, marketing and sales, hate, love, I don't know. Anyway, as long as you're enjoying it, that's great. So good to be back. Thank you, Ben, for joining me. And until next time, this has been the Brew Odyssey.